Hi, I'm Michelle the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to share my vegan low FODMAP story and hopefully take some of the BS out of IBS. Now today's video is on something that's really close to my heart, and I'll be perfectly honest right from the outset, it's not a topic that we're going to be able to do any kind of justice to in one video. So it's probably going to turn into like a little bit of a mini series, and it's on the topic of FODMAPs and food waste. If this sounds like something you're interested in, make sure you stay tuned. Let's get into it. So when you're first embarking on your FODMAP diet, food waste may not be right at the front of your mind. There's so much to take in, there's so much to deal with, and there really is such an information overload that certain types of things may just not even figure on your radar. But once you get into the FODMAP diet, particularly the elimination phase, and you start kind of picking at all those teeny tiny little portions of food that make up safe quantities or green light quantities, then all of a sudden you're going to realise that you seem to be left with an abundance of food that you're not physically able to eat in a decent time scale, let's say. So as an example, let's take something like canned lentils, which are the preferred variety of lentils on the low FODMAP diet. So once these have been rinsed and drained thoroughly, then we're probably left from an average can with about 250 grams of lentils. Now the safe portion of canned lentils per meal is 46 grams, so you can see that we're actually allowed less than a fifth of a tin. And if you're in the early stages of the elimination phase, or you're somebody who does suffer with the effects of FODMAP stacking, then you're likely to only eat those lentils once in a day and not for consecutive meals in the same day. So having said that, that would mean that that tin of lentils would need to stay open for 5 days, which isn't really ideal. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that I am a bit fly by night when it comes to best before dates and eating leftovers and things like that. I'm quite happy to eat leftover food, to eat food that's been opened, as long as it's been stored properly in a container with a lid in the fridge for the majority of the time. It's not been hanging around in a hot kitchen, it's not been hanging around without a lid on overnight, anything like that. Then I am a little bit liberal with the length of time that I'm prepared to eat something, but even my maximum is usually about 3 days. So I would say 5 days really is pushing it, and I would think that if you look on the back of most canned food, it tells you to eat it within 24 hours. Now obviously food manufacturers need to cover themselves for liability, so they do tend to err on the side of caution. But I still personally think for somebody that is quite liberal with eating leftovers and quite liberal with eating foods that have been open for a while, I think 5 days is pushing it. Now if you happen to live as part of a family, as part of a couple with housemates, then there's every chance that somebody else could make use of that food. But particularly for me in the case of lentils, that isn't the case because my husband doesn't eat pulses, he doesn't like them. So even for myself, giving myself 3 days of leeway, that would mean there would be 2 days worth of lentils that would need to be binned. And I think that's an issue. And as I say, when you first start on the low FODMAP diet, it's not going to be front of mind. You've got so much to deal with. But I do think it is something that we need to start addressing. The case is exactly the same for something like an avocado, where they say an eighth, which I think again is, I'm just going to check this, 30 grams. So they're saying that you can have 30 grams of avocado as a safe low FODMAP portion. Now for the typical avocados that I tend to buy, and the avocados that are typical here in the UK, 30 grams is usually probably just under a quarter of an avocado. Now as vegans, we are all well aware exactly what happens to the rest of that avocado a second after you cut it. So they're not the best ingredient to have hanging around anyway, let alone when you're only going to be eating like less than a quarter of this avocado, as I say, probably over several days. So exactly what are we supposed to do with the rest of it? Now, just a disclaimer here, I don't have the answers for these things, but I really think it's important to start the discussion. I am fortunate in the fact that I live with another person who more often than not will eat the remainder of the food that's left over. I can usually cook it into a meal the following day, and I'm pretty confident that compared to perhaps somebody who lives alone, my food waste on a FODMAP diet is going to be significantly lower. But what is happening to those people who do live alone? Now, Monash themselves are very, very vocal about the fact that they do want people to eat as wide a variety of food as possible. They don't want people restricting themselves further to just one or two items that are readily available to them, that they know they can eat day after day after day, that possibly there's not going to be a lot of wastage from. They do want you to get as much variety as possible, and I'm an absolute advocate of this. I really do believe that we do need to be eating as wide a diet as our symptoms will allow, and not self-restricting. But then how is that even possible, particularly if you're somebody who lives alone? What is happening to the rest of this food? What are you actually gonna do with the remainder of the food? I don't have the answer, but I just don't know how it's possible. So from my perspective, if I had been going through my elimination phase as a single person living on my own, I really don't think that I would have eaten a variety of food as wide as I was able to, knowing that the rest of that food was going to be eaten by somebody else. And that kind of brings up lots and lots of questions about whether people are actually regulating the things that they're eating, not necessarily solely based on their symptoms and reactions, but also based on the fact, does this ingredient warrant me buying it? Does it warrant me cooking it? Does it warrant me opening it? Because the rest of it is possibly going to have to be discarded. And I know that there are ways of preserving food, but then that again brings into question having the facilities to do that, having a freezer that's big enough, because by the time you get to 8 weeks of the end of an elimination phase, you are going to need a huge freezer for all these little bits and pieces of frozen food. It also brings up the question of the quality of the food once it has been frozen. Not everything freezes perfectly. Not everything is perfect once it's been frozen and then defrosted. I know this from personal experience because I will try to freeze anything that has the potential to become food waste, and I've eaten some pretty nasty meals in the past because it was something that I'd frozen and thawed, and it really was not good the second time around. But that was done as a matter of principle of not wanting to waste it. So not only is there a possibility that people are controlling their food from a food wastage point of view, but also that they're possibly missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, and just the joy of eating by having to then eat something that has been frozen and defrosted and possibly isn't at its best. And this isn't just an issue that we need to be aware of during the elimination phase, because as we know, during your reintroduction or challenge phase, you are required to eat a low FODMAP diet all the way through. Now, if we're doing it absolutely textbook, our reintroduction or challenge phase can last us at least 9 weeks beyond however many weeks we did the challenge phase. So potentially there is months and months and months and months and months there of eating restricted portions of certain foods. And then on top of that, the challenge phase brings a new element to it, because as we know, during challenge phase, we challenge very small portions of ingredients. There's even more potential for waste there. And I think that from that aspect, that's slightly different, because if, for example, you were to challenge an item, say onion, you've got to cut into that onion so that you can get the required portion for your challenge phase, and you have a reaction on day 1. So you know that you're not going to continue to challenge for days 2 and 3. Your body has made it perfectly clear that that item does not suit you, that that item will flare you up, it will make you feel ill, it will make you feel dreadful. So then you're left with an onion that is obviously going to go to waste. So I think from that point of view, we need to take that holistic approach that this food item, yes, it is going to go to waste, but if I eat it, if I continue to eat it, it is going to make me ill. And obviously we wouldn't do that with anything else. We wouldn't do that with something that we knew to be contaminated, with something that we could smell was off, was sour, just something that we suspected was not fit for consumption. We wouldn't then force ourselves to eat it for the next 3 days in order to eliminate the food waste. So obviously there needs to be a little bit of common sense around this, and there needs to be a little bit of consideration for yourself and for what your body's telling you. So that is a slightly different topic, but still all encompassing into the idea of FODMAPs and food waste. So a few little tips that I've come up with, and like I say, these by no means solve the issue, but they're just things to be a little bit mindful of during the FODMAP diet. And one of those is possibly, if you have the facilities for it, switching from fresh fruit and vegetables to frozen. Frozen spinach is a great example, because spinach, as we know, usually comes in these huge big bags, and although it withers away to nothing, the allowed portion of spinach is quite small. So usually by the time that you would get through that, if you were eating it every day, the chances are that once that bag's been opened, the rest of the spinach is not going to be of great quality. So things like frozen spinach, which usually comes in very small, almost kind of ice cube little rounds that you can maybe portion out. So maybe that's something that you could consider. Also, making yourself familiar with the storage capabilities of foods that have a very small portion amount. So for example, let's take chickpeas or lentils. Once they've been rinsed, once they've been drained, are they an item that you could freeze as they are and enjoy eating them as much as you did the day they came out the can? Or are they really something that needs to be cooked into a meal and then used at a later date? There's also the option there of, as I say, cooking the ingredient into a meal. Now this can be done either in individual portions, so that you know that the amount of that FODMAP in there is exactly as it should be, or you could do a larger portion of food, and as you freeze it, right on the top of there, that a third or a quarter of that is a low FODMAP portion, because as much as you think you're going to remember, you're not going to remember in 3 weeks' time when you come to look in the freezer exactly what's in there and exactly what portion is suitable for you. So I tend to freeze most things in Tupperware containers that I've saved from previous meals, and I would put a piece of sellotape on the top so that I'm not damaging the Tupperware, so that I'm not having to try and rub the writing off the Tupperware or getting confused the next time I use it that the thing that it says on the lid is not actually in there. I'll put a piece of sellotape on the lid and write in Sharpie on the sellotape exactly what's in there, the date that I've frozen it, and the quantity of it that is a low FODMAP suitable portion. Another idea, if it's available to you and if it's in your budget, would be to shop at a farmer's market or a food and vegetable market, somewhere where you can choose the exact quantities you need and you're not forced to buy big bags of things, that you can literally buy 1 or 2 of certain things and know that that's going to be enough for you for the week, know that you're not buying in excessive amounts. that you then need to try and freeze, cook, use up, and also that you're not buying in an amount that's going to potentially make you eat more of an item just to save wasting it. But that's not always something that's available to everybody. Another thing could potentially be if you don't live with other people, with flatmates, with people that you can share a meal with, could be maybe getting together if you're a single person with another single person, with a friend, and buying in bulk but kind of portioning things out, or sharing the cost with another person and sharing the ingredients with another person. And again, that won't work for everybody, but that is another possibility that people could think of. There's also the opportunity that if it's an ingredient that isn't going to preserve well, if it's something that you know isn't going to last very long once it's been opened, could you potentially make it into an event, make a meal of it and invite people over? So however many portions that particular item will cook, can you cook a meal for friends and family and share it out that way so that you get your portion of it and also that you feel like it hasn't gone to waste? But obviously that isn't something you can be doing on a daily or even a weekly basis in most cases, but it's just something to think about. In the case of tinned items or dried goods, if you do happen to have things in bulk, if there are things that you previously had in your kitchen before the FODMAP diet and then you definitively realise on the FODMAP diet that they're not suitable for you, then there's a potential there that you could donate them to your local food bank, to a local charity that collects food. I know a lot of supermarkets these days will have places as you're leaving the supermarket where you can donate tinned goods, particularly at certain times of year. There will be food banks that accept these types of foods all throughout the year. As long as they're all in date, as long as they haven't been opened, as long as they haven't been tampered with, then food banks, local food charities will be extremely grateful for them. There's also the potential, if you have room to store these items, that you are recommended by Monash to regularly retest items that you've previously had a negative reaction to. So in the case of tinned goods, say for example tinned legumes, they usually have quite a long date on them. Often it can be several years into the future. So if you've tested them this time and you weren't quite sure as to the reaction, then by all means, if you've got the space available to you, keep that item in to retest again in 6 months' time. And then you'll have a definitive answer, and if the answer is still this item doesn't suit me, then potentially you could look at donating it then. And as I say, most of these suggestions are not going to be suitable for every person at every phase of the low FODMAP diet. It very much depends on you and your circumstances, and to some extent your own personal tolerances. But it's just an idea to get the conversation going, and I'd really love that now I've thrown some of these ideas out there to you, that you're going to throw some of them right back at me. The more we talk about this, the more heads we get thinking about this type of topic, the more likely we're going to come up with more solutions, easier ways of doing things, and ways that we hadn't previously thought of. So I really do want to get this conversation started. Whether food waste is a topic that's front of mind for you or not, I think as vegans and even as custodians of this planet, food waste is something that we do all need to think about. And as I say, I am not trying to guilt anybody into trying to produce less food waste. I'm not trying to guilt anybody that does have to discard these items into feeling like they shouldn't eat them, or that they shouldn't have as wide a variety as somebody else. I'm literally just trying to start the conversation because I do think it needs to be addressed, and I really think that there is a responsibility on the behalf of Monash as well to perhaps give a bit more guidance as to what we do with the remainder of this food. As they're telling people that they do need to eat this variety, there is a responsibility there, whether it be from Monash, whether it be from your own dietitian, to come up with solutions for exactly what we're supposed to do with the rest of the food. And I'm not saying for a minute that they're advocating food waste. I know that is not the case, but I sometimes feel that we're only getting a part of the equation, and there's this whole area that isn't been addressed, that nobody's speaking about. And as the FODMAP diet becomes more and more prevalent, as more and more people are being recommended to the diet, we have to address the fact that there is an ever-increasing scope for more and more food wastage. I'm not trying to be controversial for controversial's sake, and I'm not gonna all of a sudden present the answer to you in a kind of because I really don't know myself. And I do know there are certain things that I do that can help with the food waste, but I only know those from my perspective, from my point of view, with the fact that quite often, more often than not, I share a meal with another person. I share the food and the ingredients with another person. I'm sharing the cost of the food with another person. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. So I would really, really love to hear from people in all different types of situations, people with big families, people who are alone, people who have more limited access to things like freezers and the capability of storing and preserving food for longer. And here, if you've been able to come up with any suggestions or any ways of minimising expense, waste food, whilst still managing to eat as wide a variety as possible. And I'd love it if we could start that conversation in the comments below and continue that conversation out. I'm really hoping that we can come up with topics and things that will be the feature of future videos, that we'll try and tackle in future videos, but I really think it's important to get this conversation started. So now it's time to hear what you think. Has the concept of FODMAPs and food waste occurred to you? Is it something that you're concerned about? Is it something that you're just putting out of your mind whilst you focus solely on the diet? Is it something that's not even an issue for you? I'd really love to hear your opinions and your ideas for how we tackle this moving forward. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.